I call it the one thought rule.
Mm.
It's suddenly, if you read books, you're white. Like that was my experience. And yeah,
That's terrible.
I don't know how intentional it is. I think it just kind of happens through osmosis because none of the people who called me that were trying to kind of keep me out or were trying to, influence my behavior. It's just something they thought of as a given. It was like, oh, that's
Right.
that's that's so white. Like,
Yeah, my dad actually, we talked about this years ago, where when he first came to this country, it was just weird for him that anything that was good, like being a good father, doing well in
Mm.
education, just being a good provider, those were considered white. And what was considered being authentically black was not doing well in school or somehow
Yeah.
being involved in the criminal justice system. It was just like this weird, and I remember him remarking on it, just like this weird psychology of like, why is that in order for me to be authentically black means I need to be like wearing different clothes or, the saggy pants and all this kind of stuff. And he just rejected that. And it is also weird that it also is this insidious thing where whiteness becomes the standard of
Mhm.
excellence, right? And it's just so in education, this really plays out in what's called like the racial achievement gap. So if you look at most education reform organizations, their whole thing is we need to close the gap between black and white students or Hispanic and white students. And over time, you start to get the impression, wow, I guess white students must be doing really great because we're always trying to close the gap with them. And yet, in the entire history of what's called the nation's report card, the National Assessment for Educational Progress, there has never been a situation where even close to 45% of white students are reading at grade level. So even if you were able to close the racial achievement gap, all you'd be accomplishing is universal mediocrity, right? And
Wow.
right, and so we got to break this essentialism where all we're looking at is race as the defining characteristic, because it's unlikely that systemic racism is the reason that a majority of white students are not reading at grade level, right? Maybe there are
Hmm.
other factors like
Mhm.
strong, stable families, access to school choice, rigorous curricula in schools. And so once you take this layer off and take a more pro human approach to a whole set of issues, you start treating people as individuals with individual characteristics. And then it's almost like the blinders are taken off. Because if you feel like everything is based on one, like when your one thought rule, if you think that everything is based on one singular factor, in this case, race, then it clouds your thinking. Then you think, oh, well, if there's a racial achievement
Mhm.
gap, that must be due to racism, and therefore the solution set must also be um, linked to race. So that's why you see, so many like suddenly, well, we got to have anti-bias training. We got to drive the racism out of all these white teachers who must be the culprit. Anyway, all this is to say, all of this robs young people of agency because when
Agency.
we trap people into beliefs that they are only defined by these singular characteristics, you've taken away my ability to define myself based on all my characteristics.